You know, we live in a pretty interesting era of technological advancements. Things that used to be science fiction for longer than most of us have been alive are now readily available. Cars can drive themselves, little drones can deliver boxes to our doorsteps, and with a few clicks, any movie, song, book, or video game can instantly be yours thanks to digital storefronts. Services like Steam allow more than 13 million users to access their games anywhere that they're connected to the internet. No matter the time of day or the place they are, anyone can get a hold of the games they want. Digital storefronts are more important and common now than ever before, yet they're still riddled with flaws, some with simple solutions, and some, well, not so much. Now that's not to say that it's all bad. As I said, you can instantly purchase pretty much whatever you want, and so long as you're connected to the internet and have the required application installed, you can start downloading a game and eventually play it. There's no need for any fragile, easily scratchable discs, and even if your hard drive fails, you can still download the title again at a later date. It's also insanely simple to make purchases. Whether or not storing your valuable banking information online is bad or not, it does allow for instant repeat purchases, making the already instantaneous digital market even faster. But like all things in life, there's always good with the bad. For every positive addition to the games industry that digital storefronts bring, there are more issues that balance or outweigh those redeeming factors. One such issue being that of digital ownership. The argument of whether or not we actually own the things we purchase online is one that's come up really more often than it should. Plain and simple, we don't own these games. When you make an account for any service like Steam, Origin, Uplay, what have you have to agree to the terms of service. In each agreement for each individual platform, there's always some rewording of the same statement. You are granted a license that supplies you with the rights to access content and services from whatever company. Meaning, you don't outright own this product, you're just leasing the rights to use it. And if you disagree, then every digital game storefront reserves the right to terminate your account. But we all know this has been common knowledge for quite a while. Why I'm mentioning it is because of what it means in regards to the security of our purchases. Even if we don't violate or disagree with the terms of service, both the developers and the storefront owners still have the right to remove products from our accounts. You all probably remember the whole PT fiasco, but there's more going on than just demos being removed from people's accounts. A few months back, during the whole "the Confederate flag is racist" debate in America, Apple started removing a bunch of titles containing the Confederate flag from the App Store, and subsequently everyone's purchase history, stopping it from being re-downloaded. In a separate instance, Square Enix removed Order of War Challenge not only from the Steam store, but also from players' libraries. In both instances, these companies removed products from the ownership of paying customers because they either didn't feel like supporting them anymore, or just didn't agree with them. It's crazy to consider that we don't actually have any control over the products we purchase, but it's a freedom you have to give up when using services like these. Companies make the choices they want, and we get no say in the matter since we had to agree to a legal document stating that we don't own anything we buy. Along with the ability to determine when we get to use the things we paid for, services like Steam have brought with them the almost complete abandonment of physical purchases for PC in exchange for digital downloads. In a perfect world, digital downloads are actually much preferred. They allow for games to be installed almost instantaneously without any need to swap disks and possibly damage them in the process. Downloading them is also extremely simple. You use the required application to start a download from the company's servers, and you're quickly on your way to playing a game. Where it gets complicated is when you start considering internet service providers. ISPs are the companies that you pay every month for access to the internet. And depending on how much you pay them, you'll get different speeds and caps. The less you pay, the slower your internet, and the less you can download every month. For most situations, this system works fine, but when it comes to downloading video games, it becomes a really serious issue. The install sizes of games are getting ridiculous, with some reaching as high as 45 and even 60 gigabytes on PC. With these entirely bloated downloads accompanied by the caps ISPs enforce onto lower paying users, installing one of these games can use up to 10% of a regular monthly download cap. This isn't even accounting for the insanely large updates that accompany many of the newer titles that already have huge install bases. Now, this wouldn't be all that much of an issue if there was an alternative, but physical copies for PC are becoming the exception. Sure, you can still buy loads of boxed copies of games for PC, but they're becoming nothing more than empty cases with Steam codes in them. And in the case of Konami's Metal Gear Solid 5, the game came with a disc, but all that was on it was the Steam installer. We're getting to a point where we're seeing more and more titles make the jump to digital exclusivity, which makes it harder for people that have less than satisfactory internet, but even more challenging for people that are looking for an avenue of secure ownership. If you're interested in putting games on your shelf, you'll have to be content with putting an empty box up there. Of course, to even get access to these digital downloads, we need to purchase them, and that's when we start to run into the issues involved with digital pricing. Giving everyone in the world the ability to purchase games means that there are a lot of currencies passing through the system. In the past, paying with these currencies online normally involved a conversion from US dollars, and depending on the value of said dollar at the time, you either won or lost. Recently though, some storefronts have been adding new forms of currency to allow people to pay with. In fact, Valve now allows for some 16 currencies when purchasing games from Steam, removing the need to convert from US dollars. On paper, this is actually a really great move, but in practice it's caused a lot more issues for international customers than anything else. Since now publishers are setting the prices for every currency themselves, some countries are still getting shafted for digital purchases. Take the recent Call of Duty Black Ops 3 for example. The game released in the US at a price of $59.99 US dollars, which is about the average price of a AAA release. But in countries like New Zealand and Mexico, customers are paying about 9% and 19% more respectively than Americans. Conversely, people in Indonesia and Malaysia are paying 29% and 37% less respectively. Skewed pricing isn't really anything new. Companies have been doing this for a long time with physical copies of games, the reason typically being the vastly different distribution costs. But that issue doesn't exist with digital purchases. There is no cost of distribution, so really everyone should be paying the same amount of money. Yet that's still not the case. The only real tangible reason for this involves brick-and-mortar stores requiring parity in pricing. If a digital purchase of a game is lower than that of a physical retailer's prices, then it's presumed the retailers would become upset, and so the prices online need to match the prices in store. That's a ridiculous reason, simply on the merit that people are getting the short end of the stick in order to keep stores happy. But despite all of this, what I think is really the biggest issue with digital storefronts is one that affects the history of the games industry, and that's digital preservation. Keeping different forms of art and media available for people to consume in the future is one of the cornerstones of history, and video games are no different. Even titles like Pac-Man on the Atari 2600 have historical significance, but up until recently, the preservation of digital games has been something that, at least in the US, was illegal. Games that utilize internet-activated DRM like EA's latest SimCity and Blizzard's Diablo 3 rely on a system wherein you connect to a remote server in order to validate your ownership of the game. If the server were to say, shut down, that game would become entirely useless unless the developers felt like fixing that problem or if users volunteered to do it. Doing so, though, was technically illegal in the US. That was until October 28th of this year. On that day, the exemption to prohibition on circumvention of copyright protection systems for access control technologies was passed by Congress, and now allows for customers to circumvent technological protection measures like internet-activated DRM or developer-controlled multiplayer servers to enable the use of games if developers have dropped support for them for at least 6 months. Before these exemptions were passed, though, it was actually considered illegal under US copyright laws to alter the games, stating that it, quote, safeguarded the availability of legitimate uses of those materials by individuals, essentially saying that DRM was good for legitimate users, which we all know to be plainly false. While this is a great step forward for America, it's still a big problem in other countries, and until they adopt a similar system, it's still going to be hard for historians in Europe and Mexico to preserve digital titles. There are certainly a lot of issues involved with digital storefronts, but the future of them maybe isn't so bleak. Services that fight for the rights of users and aim to create a more fair marketplace for gamers do exist, namely GOG and Humble Bundle. While Humble Bundle hasn't really been a champion for ethical business practices lately, they are still one of the few major storefronts supporting the sale of DRM-free games. GOG, on the other hand, is one service that actually has found a way to be profitable and relevant despite refusing to sell games with any DRM, having fair pricing for all currencies, providing compatibility solutions for older titles, and allowing for users to make backups. Even with all of the good that each site does, both of them still share a few of the issues that other marketplaces have, and that's because when it comes down to it, all digital storefronts, be them like GOG or Steam, are still very much in their infancy. We're still working out the kinks and trying to see what works and what doesn't, but they're still amazingly useful services. They make it even more convenient and cheaper in some cases to purchase video games, but at the cost of losing a lot of the rights and advantages there are to actually owning your games. We need to remember that convenience isn't worth the loss of ownership and fair pricing. And as a person with an absurd amount of games, trust me, I know it's easier said than done. But as the popularity of PC and digital-only gaming continues to grow, it's going to become more and more important that we support companies that are focused on the best interests of their consumers.